The race to become mayor of Boston got a little bit smaller this week when State Rep Jon Santiago posted this message to social media.
It was with a sincere desire to serve Boston in a greater capacity that I jumped in this race. And today, still filled with energy and optimism for Boston, I'm ending my campaign for mayor.
The lawmaker / emergency room doctor was the only Latino candidate in the race and one of two men. The other, John Barrows, barely registers in recent polls. That suggests one of four women, Acting Mayor Kim Janey and City Councilors Michelle Wu, Andrea Campbell, and Anissa Asabi George, is likely to make history this fall.
It's been an honor to join this historic field of candidates, but the people of Boston have made it clear, and I look forward to supporting the first elected woman of color to lead Boston.
Santiago wasn't willing to throw his support behind anyone, at least not yet, but two other key Latino figures in the city are Suffolk County Register of Probate Felix Arroyo and his son, Boston City Councilor Ricardo Arroyo, who plan to endorse Kim Janey at an event this weekend. The city councilor told the Boston Globe, as our mayor, she has met the moment and has shown a commitment to ensuring Boston is a city that works for everyone. And the elder Arroyo, who was Boston's first Latino city councilor, said, Kim has continued to fight for justice and equity for all. She's the right person to lead our city, and I will be working hard to elect her to a full term. Joining me on the impact of these developments are Boston Globe columnist and editorial board member Marcela García and Yawu Miller, senior editor of the Bay State Banner. Yawu and Marcela, thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Marcela, let me start with you. There are, I think, a lot of possible takeaways from Jon Santiago's exit. But I want to get your take on what his departure from the race and his inability to catch on with voters tells us about the political inclinations of Latinos, broadly speaking, in Boston.
Well, I'd like to tell you this incredible insight into the mind of the Latino electorate, but I'm afraid I can't. And I don't know if I would read a lot into Santiago's exit in regards to Latino voters. One thing that I think for me, we need to understand a little bit better and to bring a little more, I think, nuance when we talk about Latino voters is that we need to stay away from talking about the Latino vote and talking about instead Latino voters. Because if anything, one major lesson from the presidential election last year is that, as you probably know, obviously, it's been said many times that a lot of Latinos voted for Trump, and that took a lot of people by surprise, apparently. But the thing about the other big lesson, or the lesson in there, is that Latino voters are very persuadable, and they are up for grabs. And I think that is one of the things, coming back to the Boston mayoral election, I think that's one key takeaway right here, and polls have shown this, that Latinos are undecided, but that just tells you that they are up for grabs and that they are persuadable. But I would stay away from talking about the Latino electorate because that assumes that it moves as a block, and it doesn't. And so I think that, having said all of that, Santiago's exit, I think it absolutely means that he had some Latinos in his camp. His exit, means that those voters are also for grabs, but so were many Latino voters who were already undecided.
Just to reinforce some of the points that you've made, I want to show some recent polling that came out showing how Latino voters felt about this race, who they put where in terms of the various candidates. When asked who you would vote for if the Boston mayoral race were held today, the poll identified them as Hispanic voters. Kim Janey led with 18%, Michelle Wu second with 15%, Andrea Campbell next with 14%, Anissa Asabi George with 10%, and Jon Santiago down with 4%. So for me, one thing that suggests, in addition to your very important point about there being a multitude of Latino voting blocks as opposed to one, is that simply being a Latino candidate doesn't mean that all those various Latino blocks are going to flock to you, right?
Correct. And I think that doesn't mean that Jon Santiago wasn't that candidate. Perhaps he needed more time. Perhaps he needed more money. Perhaps he needed more outreach. I think the short nature of this campaign and the fact that all of our attention was pretty much concentrated in the pandemic, vaccinations, this and that, made it hard for him to galvanize Latino voters, because I do believe that, again, talking in theory, I do believe that a Latino candidate has the potential, again, just in the abstract, talking in theory, has the potential of galvanizing many blocks of Latino voters, because there are a lot of things that unite Latinos, obviously. And so I think that there is a potential for that. This time just wasn't the time.
Hold that thought. I want to come back to that later, but I want to make sure that Yawu has a chance to talk before you and I just keep going. Yawu, what's your take on why Santiago's campaign never really got going?
Well, I want to go back to something that Marcela said, which is that the idea that I think in Boston, Blacks, Latinos, and white progressives have always voted like together, historically. So, in past times, it was more like heavily Puerto Rican, Black, and white progressive. And I think increasingly people in Boston are voting on issues over racial identity. So I do think that to the extent that voters are reading newspapers, reading the polls, like getting an understanding. I mean, there've been 50 forums, like mayoral forums. So to the extent that anybody's tuning in, I do think that Santiago was sort of taking a tack to the right, supporting police and sort of going against reforms to police. He was against rent control. He sort of took positions that are on the right end of the spectrum in Boston, and that might not have resonated among the people who many assumed would have been his base.
That's a good point. And he was also, I think, at least in my experience, slow to say anything critical about former Mayor Marty Walsh's legacy. And if you have an electorate that, at least in some sections, is hungry for change, that's not necessarily appealing. Let me ask you both about the Arroyo endorsements that were just announced right as Jon Santiago dropped out of the race. Felix Arroyo, who, as I mentioned, was the first Latino city councilor ever here in the state, and current city councilor Ricardo Arroyo are going to be endorsing Kim Janey, the acting mayor, at an event in Hyde Park on Saturday. Is the timing here a coincidence, or is it clear that they were waiting for Santiago to get out before giving acting mayor Kim Janey their blessing? Marcela, what do you think?
It does seem a little coincidental, doesn't it? I don't know that, I really don't know how this played out. Obviously, I have no insight into it, but it makes sense that the timing, that it was timed, I guess, as soon as Santiago announced that he was dropping out, that the Arroyos would come in and say, we're going to support Kim Janey. I think it matters. I think it for a part of the electorate, the Arroyo's name definitely has resonance, significance, after being, again, like you mentioned, the first Latino elected to the city council. And before that, Felix Arroyo was on the school committee, the elder Felix Arroyo. And so it makes sense. I think that that the timing was perhaps coordinated, maybe not. I'm just speculating.
That's what I'm doing too. I should make it clear. Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, again, you and I know that coincidences are very rare in the political world, but again, to your point about the significance, and I mean, I do think it's going to make a difference, but I still think that there are, like you just showed in the screen, a third of Latino voters per that poll are still undecided. Again, that means that they are persuadable and up for grabs.
I'm glad you highlighted that third number because I hadn't mentioned it, and it's crucial. Yawu, how important do you think the two Arroyos saying Kim Janey is our candidate is going to be?
I think it's impossible to assess that. I mean, to really get an understanding of that. I have no idea how newspaper endorsements really affect the outcome of a race or political endorsements. But that said, though, when Marty Walsh was going against John Connolly in the 2013 election, November election, so it was just the two of them, the fact that every Black and Latino elected official endorsed Marty Walsh, I think actually really tipped the scales because I think Connolly did well with Blacks prior to that in the preliminary election. So
and one of those candidates I should throw out, as many viewers will remember, was Felix Arroyo, the former city councilor, former chief of health and human services for Marty Walsh, who left City Hall in a controversial situation, was accused of sexual harassment. He has denied that, and he's sued the city. So he's not part of this endorsement mix. But he was, I think, Marty Walsh's first cabinet hire, right? After endorsing him in that primary final against John Connolly, as you said.
Yeah. Yeah, good.
Oh, no, I completely talked over you. Do you want to finish the thought, or should I move on to the state of the race, broadly speaking? Okay. So, yeah, well, I'll stay with you for this. Recent polling seems to suggest to me that at this point in the race, Kim Janey and Michelle Wu are the front runners, that Anissa Asabi-George, who is in third place, is in striking distance, and that City Councilor Andrea Campbell, who struggled for quite a while to catch on, she's now in double digits and seems potentially to be in striking distance as well. And she's been the one, to my eye and ear, who's been most aggressive when it comes to going after the acting mayor. Does the description that I've just offered, does it match the way you're looking at the race and what you're, I guess, seeing when you talk to people in different neighborhoods around the city?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this, in addition to 50 candidate forums, there's been like half a dozen polls at least. So the polls are sort of bearing that out, that with the exception of one poll that we reported on that showed Anissa in the lead, most of the polls have shown Janey and Wu like in almost a dead heat. And the undecideds, I think, around 30%. So I think a lot is going to hinge on who are those undecided people and why are they sitting on the fence? What are they waiting for? What do they want to hear? I mean, it's entirely possible that a lot of people, there haven't been, there were two men in the race who were kind of like way in the back. Maybe some of the voters are looking for, waiting for like one of those candidates to break through. And now, does that favor Anissa? Does that favor, might it favor, Janey or Campbell? I've not looked enough at the polls to see who the undecideds are.
Marcela, I want to give you what may end up being the last word here. Although I'd love to hear Yawu's take too, so let's get both of you in. But you start off. Boston has waited a long time to elect a mayor who is not a white man. It's going to happen this year. History is going to be made in the city. How long do you think it's going to be before the city elects a Latino or a Latina to run it?
Hopefully not too long. I don't mean to say that the next mayor, mayor may last just one term or two, but if that's the case, I think we're very close. I don't want to say X number of years or anything, but if I may add something about the state of the race very quickly, and this relates to this issue, is that we need better data to understand Latino voters. And to that end, I think that the sooner that we incorporate polling that is sophisticated, that gets granular, like Yawu said, what is behind the mind of this, this third of Latinos, for instance, who are undecided, and for that matter, the Black voters who are undecided too. I really would love to see polling that is a little more sophisticated, that takes into consideration all these nuances. And let's just do a polling of Latinos. Let's just do a polling of Blacks. I know that it sounds easier said than done, but I think, and again, to your question about, okay, where do they move? Beyond knowing what compels these voters or what moves these voters, turnout is also going to be key. And I'm really watching out for the early voting or mail-in voting situation, which still has not been decided for Boston. As of today, last time I checked, or as of last time I checked, I should say, we still don't know if we're going to be able to vote early, just like we did the last year. And I think that will be very important for turnout.
That's a great point, and that's this huge variable, and the election is really close. Yawu, you, it turns out, get the final word. Do you think that there will be a similarly long wait for a Latino to break through, as we have seen for a woman of color to make it?
I think that the Latino population in Boston was probably about 1% in the late 1960s, when the community was just starting to grow in the South End. And so people my age, like in their 50s, are like almost the first generation. For the first time, we have two Latinos on the city council. We have a Latino senator, or state senator and state rep. So the population is starting to get its political footing. I do think that, obviously because Boston mayors are notoriously difficult to vote out of office once they're in office. Everything will depend on how long the Janey, Wu, Campbell, Asabi George administration lasts. But next go around, I think that there will be a crop of candidates who have had electoral experience and are, perhaps well positioned to run for mayor.
All right, on that note, Yawu Miller, Marcela, Garcia, excellent talking with you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.